I used to think that silence was a form of strength, but lately I've started to wonder if it's just a place where people put you when they no longer want to explain themselves. The garage light flickered as I stepped out of the Bentley. I parked it in space B9, same as always, the license plate half covered in dust on purpose. The elevator didn't reach my floor, so I walked up carrying the same grocery bag I reused every week, creased, faded, with the handle repaired by a safety pin. Inside the apartment, the paint near the windowsill had curled into thin, yellowed chips. I let my coat fall on the back of the chair and reached for the cardigan by the door hook. The left sleeve had a hole where the wool thinned with time. I kept meaning to fix it, but part of me liked that it unraveled slowly, without anyone noticing. The envelope was already on the table. Ivory stock gold foil trim, hand-addressed in neat block letters. I ran my thumb under the seal and slid out the invitation. Lily Elizabeth Walker and Benjamin Hart, together with their families, invite you to witness their wedding celebration. I checked the bottom. Venue, time, dress code. No mention of my name. I turned it over to make sure something hadn't fallen out. A small insert, maybe. A note, or even an afterthought. Nothing. Just silence printed on expensive paper. I didn't feel anything at first. Not exactly. I stood there holding the invitation between my fingers, then placed it back down without bending it. I washed my hands out of habit, dried them on the same towel I'd used for 3 days, and opened the fridge. The glass jar of peach jam I'd made 2 summers ago was still sealed, a half-used lemon, 1 slice of white bread. I wasn't hungry. I sat down at the table. My chair made a soft creak, the same sound every evening. The box was already open beside me, the one lined in blue velvet that used to hold heirloom pins and cufflinks. I'd removed most of them, placed them elsewhere. All that remained was a wedding band, a church key, and a worn-out photo from 1972. I remembered the first time Lily called me by my first name in front of her friends. "That's just Florence," she'd said, waving me off as if I were a woman who wandered in from the building lobby. I brought deviled eggs that day. No one touched them. I reached for the old flip phone. 3 missed calls, none recent. I dialed Matthew. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said. "I got something in the mail today." A pause just long enough to mark discomfort. Oh, the invite. I told Heather you'd probably see it this week. She left my name out. Another pause. She thought it might be easier that way. Less pressure. The travel, the formality. She said you don't really enjoy these things. She said, or you said. He didn't answer. His voice dropped like someone lowering a window just enough to keep the cold out. "Look, it's not a big deal. You can still come if you really want to. We just thought it might be better if it stayed simple." I hung up after that. Not abruptly, just slowly enough for the line to feel final. I opened the top drawer of the buffet cabinet and pulled out the small notepad I used to keep track of dates. I crossed out Lily's name, not out of spite, just for clarity. It wasn't the exclusion that stung. Not really. It was the way the exclusion had been smoothed over, like someone gently closing a door they never intended to reopen. I hadn't even been worth the pretense of forgetting. In the living room corner sat the briefcase I still kept locked. Inside, deeds, portfolios, key documents, and the revised trust I had signed last year, transferring everything into my sole name with contingencies known only to Walter Merrick. $3.3 million. It wasn't a fortune compared to others I knew, but it was enough to fund 3 generations of people who now believed I lived on coupons and bus schedules. That belief hadn't happened overnight. I let it unfold slowly. It started with letting go of the country house, then the Audi, then the clothes, then the invitations to only if you're up for it events. I made excuses. I smiled when they called me forgetful. I said thank you when Heather left grocery store coupons on my seat. I walked to the bathroom. The tiles had been cracked since I moved in. I liked them that way. Every flaw reminded me that this space was a performance, and the audience had no idea they were being watched. The ring in the box caught the hallway light. My husband's initials were still visible on the inside. I wore it once a week on Tuesdays when I visited the bank downtown. No one asked why. I turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, the envelope glowed faintly where the gold reflected the street lamp. I thought about tossing it. Instead, I folded it once and slid it into the small drawer where I kept paper clip string and things people assumed I had no use for anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't call anyone back. I just sat there hands still while the kettle whistled for longer than it should have. When I finally stood up, I poured the water without the tea bag. Some things don't need steeping to be bitter. It's strange how much space one small omission can take up inside a quiet room. And stranger still, how clearly you hear the absence once you've stopped making noise to fill it. Some things don't break when they're dropped. They just go quiet. The boxes were already taped shut. 5 of them lined the far wall, stacked neatly under the coat rack. I'd written names on each in pencil light enough to erase if needed. 1 for Lily, 2 for the boys, 1 for Heather, and the last one with no label. I had wrapped every item myself. Tissue paper from a discount store. Ribbons reused from old gift baskets. The pearls I wore to my husband's memorial were folded in a handkerchief and placed next to a photo of our honeymoon in Colorado. No one had asked for these things. I gave them because I thought it mattered. There was a time when I believed the smallest gestures could keep a place for me at the table. I would bring baked goods in reusable tins, always return dishes spotless, always leave before the party thinned. I told myself that if I made no demands, they would remember me as gracious. If I asked for nothing, maybe I would still belong. I used to sit on the far end of their living room by the window where the sunlight caught the dust in the curtains. The first time I chose that seat so I wouldn't block the view. The second time because I thought they preferred it. After that, I wasn't offered any other seat. "You're fine there, right? That way it's easier for people to move around," Heather once said, balancing a tray of wine glasses without looking up. I nodded, even though no one was looking. That seat had a pillow with a tear in the seam. I never mentioned it. I learned how to fold my coat to keep from catching on the loose thread. After a while, it became instinct. Once, I brought over a framed photo of Matthew as a child taken at a fall carnival. I left it on the counter wrapped in paper. It was never mentioned. Months later, I found the same frame with the photo replaced on a side shelf near the laundry room, half obscured by a jar of lint balls and a cracked vase. There was one year I decided to offer a family trip. I had researched resorts in Arizona, quiet ones, nothing flashy. I paid the deposit. I thought it would be healing. "I don't think that's necessary," Matthew had said, folding his napkin slowly. "We're not looking for charity." That word had lodged somewhere under my ribs. He didn't know about the booking. He didn't know the dates were already chosen around their school calendar. He didn't ask. The sapphire earrings were my mother-in-law's. I gave them to Heather after Lily's graduation party. I remember her nod barely audible as she slipped them into her purse between sips of wine. A week later, I saw a listing online, vintage excellent condition never worn. The photo showed the same dent on the clasp. At Christmas, I brought a set of monogrammed towels. Heather laughed. "We already have Turkish cotton," she said, holding them up for the room. "But it's sweet. Thank you." She folded them with the tags still attached and handed them to the housekeeper the next day. I watched from the guest bathroom window. Matthew once told me during a walk around the block, "You don't need to prove anything. Just relax. We're okay." That was after I offered to help them refinance their mortgage. He never asked how I knew the rates had changed. There's a shadow behind the sofa in their living room formed by the light of the standing lamp and the way the curtain pulls at the side. It falls right where I usually sit. I used to wonder if they noticed, if it bothered them in photos. I learned to keep still in that space, to smile when spoken to hold back when I noticed a chipped plate or a scuffed baseboard. I became useful in silence, wrapping leftovers, wiping counters, double-checking the locks. One evening, as guests lingered and voices rose, Heather turned to me. Her voice was even. "You don't need to say anything. Just sit and be here. Sometimes when you speak, it makes people nervous." I didn't respond. I reached for my glass, which had already been emptied, and pretended to sip. Later that night, I found a chip in my nail polish. I sat in their bathroom under the harsh yellow light using a cotton swab to clean the edge. The bottle was mine. I'd brought it once and left it behind. There's a note in my ledger written 3 years ago. "No one must know I still hold the Wyoming land. It was never gifted away. The handwriting is careful. Below it, circled in blue ink, is limit disclosures. Observe." I used to reread that page when I felt the urge to correct someone, when they misstated the will, when they assumed the car was leased, when Heather laughed about me using checks instead of Venmo. There was one moment I considered speaking: a brunch. Heather was listing vacation rentals, her voice floating over clinks of silverware. "I told Matt we should have gone solo. His mom wouldn't even know what to pack." I held the edge of the table with both hands, felt the ridge in the wood against my thumb. A waitress passed by. I let go. I never asked for affection, only presence. A nod, a shared joke, a seat at the table where I didn't have to prove I wasn't in the way. I closed the boxes that night with an extra layer of tape. The pearls stayed in mine. So did the photo. I marked it not with names, but with initials, just in case. I keep the investment records in a folder labeled MESC. It sits behind old recipe cards in the drawer beneath the stove. Every once in a while, I check the figures. They grow. Quietly, steadily. No applause. No applause needed. Some gifts I've learned are not meant to be unwrapped in front of others. They are given in silence, returned in silence, and sometimes never noticed at all. Some dates leave no mark on a calendar, only on the shelf of your refrigerator. I'd left the cake wrapped in wax paper, chocolate mousse, the kind I used to make when Matthew was small. One slice taken out, 3 strawberries placed just so on top. I hadn't expected visitors. I simply thought there might be a moment when I'd want something sweet. The kitchen stayed quiet all morning. No messages lit up the screen. The phone didn't buzz. I wiped the counter more than once, though it wasn't dirty. There was a faint mark from the bottom of my coffee cup that never quite faded. I left it there. It looked like something that once mattered. I don't write reminders for my birthday. Never have. But I used to keep the cards in a tin under the sink, folded neatly by year. Crayon drawings, scribbled signatures, "Love you, Nana," in uneven loops. I haven't added to it in 4 years. When Matthew turned 5, I pulled out of a bid for a downtown redevelopment contract, $2 million at stake. They said it was foolish. I flew across the state with a plastic crown in my bag and stood in line at a children's arcade holding a balloon while he built towers out of red Legos. He wore a cape all day. I still have a photo where he wouldn't take it off even at the table. Years later, when I was awarded the honorary doctorate for my work in infrastructure equity, the stage lights were too hot and the robe too stiff. I scanned the audience. The seat I'd saved for him remained empty. Afterward, Heather called. Matthew had a work thing. And honestly, no offense, but those ceremonies are kind of outdated. You know, the program is still in my drawer, It has my name embossed in gold. I once asked if Lily would like me to help plan her graduation party. Heather smiled. You don't need to worry about those kinds of things anymore. Just show up and enjoy it unless it's too far for you. When I arrived, my seat was behind two women I didn't recognize. One wore perfume that made my throat close. The other kept turning to take photos. I clapped when Lily's name was called, but no one turned around. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if I simply disappeared from the family photo albums. Not suddenly, not in drama, but in the soft erasure of time. They could tell a story where I never held Matthew's hand on the first day of school. Never drove 6 hours when Lily had her tonsils removed, never stayed up. Folding invitations for their wedding, though I wasn't on the guest list envelope myself. I once overheard Heather explaining my absence at a dinner. She's kind of doing her own thing these days. We support her independence. She said it with a laugh fork resting between her fingers like punctuation. I wasn't supposed to hear, or maybe I was. The truth is, they don't forget me. They choose not to remember. There's a photo on my mantle not framed, just resting against a candle. It shows the back of my head slightly blurred from Lily's second birthday. I'm holding a tray of juice boxes. I know it's me because of the cardigan, the one with the mismatched button I never got around to fixing. I brought gifts every holiday, thoughtfully chosen, not expensive. A book of pressed flowers for Lily, a chessboard for Jonah, a subscription to a science magazine for Drew. One year, Heather handed them back. We're trying to keep things minimal. Experiences over stuff you know, I nodded. The packages stayed in the trunk for weeks until I drove them to a shelter. Even when I baked, I used containers I didn't mind losing. I've never had one returned. Somewhere in someone's cupboard, there's a blue Pyrex dish with my name etched on the bottom. That's the closest I've come to leaving a mark. There's a drawer in their house labeled Amieski. I once saw it half open, filled with chargers, batteries, loose keys, a pen shaped like a giraffe. On top sat a folded Christmas card I recognized, the one I wrote 2 years ago. The ink had faded. They don't look at me with malice. That's the trick of it. It's all politeness, civil tones, careful phrasing. But the absence is sharp. Not cruel, just clean, a removal. Once, when I complimented Heather's hosting at Thanksgiving, she replied without turning, "It's nice to have help, but it's also nice when people don't need the spotlight." I poured water into the cranberry vase without speaking. It cracked down the side later that night. The cake in my fridge held its shape. I checked on it like someone might check a wound. There's something about mousse, how it holds air, how it deflates without warning. I used to whip it by hand. Now I use a mixer and add less sugar. No one ever noticed. I never tell them when it's my birthday. I don't post anything. Don't make suggestions. But there was a year Matthew remembered. He brought over a candle, just one, and placed it on a bran muffin. "Health over sugar, right?" he said, already walking out. I didn't light it. I saved the candle, though. It sits in my junk drawer next to a receipt for a gift I never gave. Some things you keep not for what they are, but for what they didn't become. The last message I received from Lily was a thumbs-up emoji in response to a photo I sent of an autumn tree. I had captioned it, just like the one near the old house. No reply followed. I deleted the message thread the next day. I still remember the smell of Matthew's childhood shampoo, the one with dinosaurs on the bottle. I used to wash his hair in a yellow tub and dry it with a towel that read, "Mr. Sunshine." I donated that towel when I moved. I once thought the past was a place I could visit in conversation, that if I reminded them gently, they might turn their heads just a little. But now I know their memory is selective, and I am no longer inside it. Not forgotten, just deliberately unremembered. I never liked mirrors in rooms full of people. They catch too much that no one says out loud, qui sait. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into Matthew's house that night wasn't the flowers or the music. It was the way my reflection in the hallway mirror looked like someone who had wandered in by mistake. Heather had arranged the decorations, beautifully neutral florals, catered appetizers, flickering glass candles. It looked like money spent by someone who needed people to notice. I brought a simple box carefully wrapped in soft gray paper. Inside was a framed sketch, an original structural drawing from the year Matthew and his father built their first treehouse together. It wasn't valuable to anyone but us. At least that's what I thought. Heather met me at the door with her lips already shaped for performance. "Oh, Mother, that's what you're wearing," she paused. "How modest." I didn't answer. I reached into my coat pocket and offered the box. She took it like one might take tissues from a stranger. Then she smiled past me, her voice already rising to greet another guest. I folded my coat and tucked it beneath my arm. They had set a small folding chair in the corner, slightly behind the buffet. There were plenty of open seats at the main table, but mine had been marked with a paper name tag, Florence in rushed handwriting without even a title. Everyone else had proper place cards, Mr. Whitman from the firm Dr. Leone from the university Uncle Paul, who was no one's uncle but seemed to carry weight here. Heather floated. She made rounds like she owned the air between people. Matthew mostly smiled, shook hands, nodded. Every so often he looked toward me, but never long enough to be caught. I rested my purse in my lap and traced the stitching of my cardigan sleeve. One thread had started to fray near the cuff, and I rolled it gently between my fingers until it vanished back into the fabric. They served wine in tall glasses, too tall for people who never listened, and appetizers so delicate they looked afraid to be eaten. No one offered me anything. I stood to find a glass of water. A younger woman, someone from the marketing department, bumped my arm and murmured an apology without turning. Back at my chair, I waited for the toast. It came late. Heather climbed 2 steps up the stair landing, holding her glass high. Everyone, she sang, "Let's raise a glass to the man of the hour. My brilliant, tireless husband, who's just been promoted to lead engineer. He doesn't just carry the department, he carries this whole family laughter." Hands raised. Then the tone shifted, and she added with a smile too sharp to be casual, "Maybe it's time a few of us stopped depending on his shoulders. Maybe someone should consider getting a job instead of, what do they call it, early retirement at someone else's expense." "Right, Mother." The silence came in pieces. A few half-laughs cracked, then died. Someone coughed. Someone else reached for their wine. I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I didn't look at Matthew. He said nothing. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. I set my glass down on the carpet instead of the table. Quietly. It left a faint, wet ring on the floor that no one noticed. Then I walked toward the front door coat still folded beneath my arm. No one tried to stop me. I passed by the mirror again on my way out. My reflection didn't look out of place anymore. It looked right where it belonged outside the frame. In the car, I didn't turn on the engine right away. I took the flower pin off my cardigan and placed it beside me on the seat. I unfastened my watch and laid it next to it. My hands were steady, but my throat felt dry like I'd swallowed too much dust. The dashboard light caught the edge of the box Heather had returned unopened. It lay where I'd set it in the passenger seat, quiet square, untouched. For a long time, I didn't speak. There was no one to hear, and I didn't need to say it out loud anyway. But in my mind, the words formed clearly. That was the moment I stopped pretending they didn't know what they were doing. And I stopped pretending I didn't either. There's a kind of silence that doesn't wait to be broken. It simply settles like dust on polished wood, uninvited, but permanent. I brewed my tea slower than usual, not out of hesitation, but because I had nowhere else to be. The chipped rim of the porcelain cup brushed against my lip as I sat by the window where the morning light didn't quite reach the floor. The water left faint steam rings on the notepad beside me, lined pages I had ignored for months. I opened a fresh envelope and began with no greeting. It wasn't a letter for Matthew. Or Heather. I didn't believe in announcing exits. I wrote only what needed to be remembered: dates, figures, titles, and signatures. Names of properties I had concealed under layers of LLCs. Instructions for Walter Merrick, my attorney of 15 years. He once asked why I lived like a tenant in a life I built. I told him it was simpler that way. He had stopped asking. I sealed the envelope with a gold sticker. No return address. Just the name, Florence E. Walker, in my own handwriting, neat and narrow. I didn't call Matthew. I didn't text Heather. I didn't wait for explanations or apologies in the shape of flowers or guilt-wrapped gifts. I just took down the framed photo in the hallway, the one from our last family trip to the mountains 10 years ago. I had been cropped on the edge, my face half in shadow, the only one not looking at the camera. I wrapped it in a kitchen towel and placed it in a cardboard box with the others. There were so many others. Letters from Matthew's childhood, postcards from summer camps, handmade coupons that promised one free hug, expiring never. I folded them without reading, stacking memory on memory like fragile china, knowing none of them had been used in years. I blocked Heather's number, not out of anger, just efficiency. The phone made no sound as I did it. Matthew's number remained unblocked but untouched. At noon, I called the bank. The same woman answered, the one who always greeted me with, "Of course, Ms. Walker." I asked her to terminate the silent debit that transferred monthly funds into the shared family account. She didn't ask why. People like her didn't need to. Discretion came packaged with the mahogany desk and the velvet-bound folders. Later, I opened my closet and removed the soft cashmere coats I had pretended not to own. Folded between them was a small velvet pouch. Inside, the signet ring from my husband's estate. I placed it back on my finger, not as a statement, just as a key. That evening, I left the ground floor apartment I had used for nearly a decade. No forwarding address was left on the counter. The key I returned to the super was a spare never used. I had always kept the original with me out of habit more than anything. The penthouse was still clean, the curtains untouched. The fridge hummed quieter than I remembered. I unpacked nothing that night. I just stood near the glass wall, watching headlights smear across the lake far below like slow-moving fireflies. Somewhere, someone was laughing. Somewhere, music played. None of it reached me. The height filtered everything. There were no photos on the mantel, no reminders on the fridge. Only a small wooden box on the side table filled with keys to properties I owned in 3 states, none of which my family had ever visited. I never hid them out of spite. I had simply learned to move around silence like one learns to move through a dark room. Gently, carefully, without asking who turned out the light. A week later, Walter sent a confirmation file with the finalized changes. The inheritance clause was voided. The shared Wyoming deed was rewritten under a new holding company. All pending access was revoked. There was no ceremony to it, just cold lines of legal type on cream paper. At the bottom, a post-it in Walter's handwriting. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I didn't reply. I burned the note. Not out of drama, only finality. I sorted through the jewelry drawer. Half the items were gifts I had once imagined handing down. A gold cuff from Paris. A brooch passed from my grandmother. I boxed them carefully, labeled them auction. They would go to someone who paid attention to details. That night, I left my phone in a drawer. I didn't check messages. I didn't scroll through photos. The silence felt clean, unshared. I brewed tea again. Same blend, same cup. This time, no steam ring. The notepad had been removed. The table was bare. Some people leave with noise, others with closure. I left the way. Dust leaves a windowsill when the wind finally remembers it. And I did not look back. Sometimes the absence of noise feels louder than anything else. I noticed it most in the mornings when the floor didn't creak with someone else's footsteps, when the hum of the elevator never stopped on my level, when no one left shoes in the hallway that weren't mine. I started using the good china. Not for guests, not for ceremony, just for my own hands. The porcelain felt foreign at first, like it had forgotten me. Or maybe I had forgotten the weight of things that weren't meant to be disposable. I poured tea into a cup edged with fine gold leaf, the same set that had once been wrapped in tissue and stored behind discount cereal. The saucer rang faintly against the marble countertop. I let it ring. The first grocery trip startled me. The man at the cheese counter asked if I wanted the imported brie or the local one. I hadn't made that kind of decision in years. I stood for a moment too long, not confused, just unfamiliar with being asked. No one followed me through the aisles, no one judged what I placed in the basket. I bought the figs I liked, the dark chocolate that came in silver foil, a small bouquet of tulips just because they stood quietly in a bucket near the register. The clerk didn't call me ma'am like a burden. She just smiled and handed me the receipt like any other person. At home, I opened the windows and left them open. Not for the breeze, but for the light. There was a room with glass walls and books I hadn't touched since my husband died. I dusted them slowly, one by one. Some still had bookmarks, thin receipts from flights and old cafes. I found a note scribbled in the margin of an engineering text. Wind never moves in straight lines. Neither do we. I had written it once. I read it like it belonged to someone else. Once, without thinking, I picked up my phone and dialed the first 2 digits of Matthew's number. My thumb hovered over the third. I set the phone down and watched the screen go black. It didn't ring. It didn't have to. No one called me dependent anymore. No one told me to wait in the car. No one placed my handbag on the floor when seating ran out. A week passed. Maybe 2. I stopped counting after the 5th day. Time when it's fully yours behaves differently. The walls of the penthouse didn't echo even in silence. They absorbed it. They kept it close like a private vow. I wore the scarf I liked. The one Heather had once told me looked a bit much for someone your age. I wore it anyway. No one looked twice. No one needed to. I stopped hiding the ring, the one with the blue stone worn thin at the edges. People in the elevator glanced at it with polite curiosity. Some smiled. No one asked if I could afford it. No one asked if it belonged to someone else. One morning, I walked farther than usual, past the corner cafe beyond the gated plaza until I found a small park tucked between 2 buildings. A few mothers sat on benches watching children paint with wide strokes on stretched paper. Red, green, and something in between. I lingered near a tree. A woman looked up. Late 30s hair in a loose braid, a clipboard on her lap. "Would you like to join us?" Her tone was gentle but clear, like someone used to invitations being declined. I hesitated. She smiled, motioned to an open seat. I sat down, not because I needed to, but because the air around her felt unbothered. A little boy held up a drawing. "It's a bridge," he explained, "but not real." I leaned in. "Well," I said, "bridges don't have to be real to work. Some of the best ones aren't made of steel." The teacher glanced over. "Were you an architect?" "Close enough," I said. "Structural engineer, retired. Though I can still make a suspension bridge out of binder clips and string." That made her laugh, not in the way people laugh to be polite, but like it mattered. She introduced herself. "Rachel Ames." I didn't offer my full name. I wasn't hiding. I just wanted to keep the moment small enough to fit in my pocket. She asked nothing more, just handed me a brush and a page. I didn't paint. I only held the brush. It was enough. That night I didn't check the mailbox. I didn't wonder if Matthew had reached out. I didn't open the folder labeled estate plans. Son. I left it on the shelf. Unread. Instead, I reshelved the books I had cleaned. Not alphabetically, but by texture, smooth, worn, cracked, cloth-bound. The way I liked them. There's a kind of relief that doesn't look like joy. It looks like walking without checking your shadow, eating without waiting to be asked if you're done, breathing without apologizing for it taking space. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't light a candle or make a vow. I just watched the sun fold itself into the lake's edge. No one asked where I had gone. No one came looking. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel missing. Not even a little. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it's the silence that tells you who's afraid. I hadn't looked at the skyline in weeks, not properly. The lake didn't shimmer the way magazines said it should. It just sat there, wide and indifferent, like a thing too old to pretend anymore. I held the porcelain handle of the teacup with 2 fingers, less out of habit, now more because the weight felt familiar. The intercom buzzed. 3 short notes. I rarely answered, but that day the front desk followed with a call. I listened to the static between the receptionist's sentences. A woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law. She was firm. We didn't let her up. I didn't respond. He waited, then ended the call with a polite cough. I returned the teacup to its saucer. The ceramic click echoed louder than it should have. She must have seen the photo. It wasn't meant for anyone beyond the frame, a blurry shot from a charity gala I hadn't intended to attend. An old friend had pulled me in at the last moment. The rooftop lights, the reflection of glass, the accidental corner where I stood, speaking to no one in particular, wearing the green silk I'd almost thrown out. 3 days later, an email appeared in my inbox. I understand now why you've been avoiding us. It must be comfortable hiding in luxury while your son carries everything. If this is how you intend to proceed, we may need to involve legal counsel. Matthew has a right to protect your interests, especially if there are questions about your clarity. There was no greeting, no sign-off, just the threat dressed in soft fabric. I read it once. I didn't reply. Instead, I wiped the edge of the screen with the hem of my sleeve and closed the laptop. The elevator in this building doesn't ding like others. It arrives with a whisper. One evening, it stopped on my floor and no one stepped out. A pause. Then the doors closed again. A week later, the envelope arrived. White heavy. Thicker than a letter too stiff for a holiday card. The seal was pressed, not glued. My name spelled cleanly in block print. Inside, the motion for emergency guardianship, filed by Heather, supported by an attached affidavit. Words like cognitive decline, impaired judgment, susceptibility to manipulation. She had cited my sudden withdrawal from familial communication, erratic financial decisions, and isolated social behavior. Under the declaration of truth. In my professional opinion, as her daughter-in-law, I believe she is no longer fit to manage her estate. Matthew's signature didn't appear anywhere, but his silence did. I set the papers on the marble counter, aligned the corners, and left them untouched for a full day. When I finally picked them up again, I added a yellow tab at the top and slid them into a folder labeled Walter. It had been some time since I'd written his number on anything. I didn't need to speak. His assistant recognized my voice before I finished my first sentence. "There will be a response," she said quietly. I took my time preparing the supporting documents, the evaluations, the records, the titles. My last executive medical review stamped and dated. My portfolio activity, all decisions cross-signed by 3 firms. No panic, just alignment. I met with Walter in a room with books taller than either of us. He didn't speak much. He tapped a pencil against his notebook and reviewed every page. When he looked up, he didn't smile. "They thought you were alone," he said. "That's where they miscalculated." I handed him the last sheet, a notarized copy of a letter Heather once sent me months ago, requesting access to transfer funds from an account she claimed was partially hers by moral right. He whistled softly, folded the paper once, and placed it behind the others. There were no raised voices, no hand-wringing, just the slow, methodical turning of screws. I returned home, placed the ring dish back where it belonged, and took off my shoes. They were the kind with buckles I used to avoid, too stiff, too narrow. Now they fit. No messages from Matthew, no visits. But I noticed small movements in the dark. A LinkedIn notification his job status marked open to opportunities. A friend of a friend mentioning at brunch that he'd been passed over for a management role. A neighbor of mine, a sharp woman named Colette, nodded to me once in the elevator and said, "Your son's wife came to my office last week. Marketing pitch. Very polished, very nervous." I folded my arms. "Did she mention my name?" She did. Briefly. Then she didn't. The building seemed taller that evening, or maybe I just stood straighter. A few days later, a card arrived. Not in an envelope. Just slid under the door. "Let's talk. We're all adults here." I placed it beside the others. I didn't respond. I boiled water for tea. Same brand. Same steep time. I set the timer not because I needed to, but because it made the waiting feel chosen. Somewhere between the boil and the pour, I remembered something my father once said long ago when I came home from school with a bruised knee and no explanation. You don't have to fight to win. You just have to stand where they can't reach. The bruise faded. The words stayed. When the tea cooled, I drank it without sugar. It tasted the way I liked it, simple, bitter, exact. No knock came that night. No apology either. But then again, I no longer expected one. And that changed everything. There was a time I wore soft colors just to be ignored. Not to blend in, but to disappear cleanly like the edge of steam rising from a cup. I had taken the gray suit from the garment bag not to impress anyone. The thread count didn't matter. The lapel still curved in the same spot, slightly lifted from where I used to pin my name tag. I tried it on in front of the mirror, expecting it to feel like a costume. It didn't. It just felt honest. Rachel had asked me to speak again. Something small. Explain how bridges hold themselves up when no one's watching. That's how she put it. I brought string paper clips, one long piece of balsa wood. Nothing else. The children listened more than adults ever had. "Is it true you used to build real buildings?" a boy asked, chewing on the end of a pencil. I drew a triangle on the board and nodded. Not buildings. Systems that keep them standing. Rachel smiled at me from the corner of the room. Later, as we cleaned up, she handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside, a sketch drawing of a bridge made from macaroni noodles and markers. They said this was for the lady who talks about strong things quietly. I placed it in my satchel without folding it again. Walter had everything he needed. I gave him access to the folder labeled Private HJ. It contained a decade's worth of transfers, archived emails, recorded voicemails. I hadn't expected to use them, but I had kept them. One message stood out. "If you care about keeping peace in this family, you'll transfer it now. Don't drag this out." "We're not going to beg." Her voice was clear. I didn't delete it. I let Walter decide what to do with it. He later called and said her credit report came in. 48,000 in debt. Most of it cosmetic procedures and boutique charges. None of it essential. I didn't comment. He continued. We have 6 messages, 4 emails, 2 notarized contradictions. And the recorded incident from last Thanksgiving where she referred to you as non-essential. That was her word, not mine. I remembered that moment. Not the insult, but how I held my breath so tightly it pressed into my collarbone. The case would be formal now. Her motion to declare me mentally incompetent was officially countered with evidence of undue influence, misrepresentation, and potential financial exploitation. Walter said it would hold. Meanwhile, I accepted a part-time advisory role with the nonprofit. Nothing permanent. A few hours a week reviewing student models and teaching spatial awareness through basic design. I didn't list my former positions. They only called me Ms. Florence. That was enough. One afternoon, I arrived early and found the light in the utility closet was still flickering, same way it had the week before. I stood under it and counted the rhythm, 2 quick pulses, pause, another single flash. I jotted it down on the margin of a lesson plan and later sent a note to maintenance. I never told anyone. But the light stopped flickering by Monday. The first time I saw Matthew again, it was unannounced. I had just finished explaining force distribution to a group of 8th graders. They were building a tower with only straws and tape. I looked up and saw him through the glass partition, standing stiffly, hands in his coat pockets. He hadn't aged, but he looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had grown. He waited until the class emptied before stepping in. His shoes tapped the floor like he wasn't sure if he was allowed in. "You work here." His eyes scanned the whiteboard, the papers, the box of rubber bands. "For now," I said, placing a model bridge onto a shelf. I thought he began, but didn't finish. I took a sip from the mug on my desk. The handle had a chip in it. I turned the chip toward my palm. He shifted. "I didn't know this was what you were doing. It doesn't need to be known to be real." He looked down. Heather didn't mean for it to go that far. She was just worried. "About control," I said, "not about me." He ran a hand through his hair. "This isn't easy." I glanced toward the window. The macaroni bridge drawing was taped beside it, now sun-faded, still intact. "I suppose not," I said. "But some things need to fall before we understand how they're built." He didn't sit. He didn't move closer. He just looked at me like he was hoping for something to soften. "I didn't sign anything," he said finally. "I never agreed with the motion." "But you didn't object." He didn't answer. A quiet beat passed. He stared at the models the students had built. None of them perfect. All of them upright. He pointed at one and gave a weak smile. "That one leans a little." "It still stands," I said. He turned to go. "I'll let you get back to it." I nodded once. "Take care, Matthew." The door clicked shut behind him. I didn't watch him leave. Later that day, Rachel asked me what I wanted to do for the upcoming school showcase. "We could display your students' work right at the front. Your name would be on the placard." I shook my head. "No placard. Just the kids' names." I stayed late that night adjusting one of the student bridges that had started to sag. I didn't replace it. I just reinforced it with a few more supports. Invisible from the outside. Sometimes the difference isn't in how loudly you stand. It's in how quietly you no longer bow. Some endings don't make noise. They arrive like a second breath, calm but irreversible. I sat with my palms resting flat against the lacquered wood of the table. My fingernails bore faint impressions from the spiral binding of the folder I had held all morning. Walter had placed it before me gently, as if setting down a clock that couldn't be wound backward. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no gavel slamming. Just the low shuffle of paper and a ceiling light that hummed faintly with electricity. Walter spoke clearly. He had facts, not volume. He didn't need to sway emotion, he laid out what already existed. There was a page from a private investigator confirming Heather had attempted to replicate my signature at a Chase branch in Midtown. The clerk flagged it. No funds were moved, but the signature was kept compared, stored. There were 2 typed emails between Heather and a property attorney I'd never met. They discussed strategies for easing a mentally deteriorating parent into voluntary asset transfer. The phrase was repeated: voluntary, easing. Not once did they consider asking. The psychiatrist's letters were short. No indication of cognitive decline. No evidence of delusional thought. Subject is aware, lucid, and appropriately guarded. When Walter handed the printed bundle to the judge, he added one more line. She may not have been loud, but she was never lost. Heather didn't speak during the hearing. She kept glancing toward the exit door, like she wanted it to open inward, as if someone would pull her out. No one did. The judgment came simply. Petition denied. Investigation ordered. Restraining boundaries set. 9 months probation, 3 years restricted contact. The judge's tone was cool, procedural. Outside, I paused by a vending machine, not to buy anything, but to study the line of condensation running down its side. I traced it lightly with my fingertip, then wiped it away with a tissue I folded neatly and tucked back into my purse. That evening, Walter left the file on my kitchen counter unopened. I didn't touch it. I made tea with the loose leaves I'd saved for the end of something. Jasmine and lavender, a blend I'd once used to scent closets, not drink. The next day, a letter arrived in a plain envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a divorce petition. No return address. Just a small note paper-clipped on top. I read it all. I'm sorry for what I let happen, M. It was his handwriting. Slanted uneven. The same he used in 6th grade when he forged my signature on a field trip form to avoid a dentist appointment. 3 days later, the front desk called. There's a visitor here. He says you're his mother. I didn't reply immediately. I looked down at the ceramic bowl in my lap. Inside were walnut halves I had cracked one by one that morning. I had eaten none of them. Send him up, I finally said. He stood in the entryway, not moving past the first rug. His shoulders looked heavier than his coat. I offered him water in a glass, not a bottle. He didn't drink it. I let it go too long. I nodded. She told me you were getting worse, that you couldn't keep track of things. I didn't interrupt. And I believed her, because it was easier. I waited. He sat finally on the edge of the armchair. His fingers traced the seams on his jeans. I never once asked if you needed help, only if you had more to give. The silence stretched. Then he looked at me, really looked. I read what Heather wrote in those emails. I saw the bank signature, the footage. She called you a temporary obstacle. I placed the teacup down without noise. The rim bore the faintest chip. He wiped at his eyes roughly as if frustrated that they worked. I don't know how to make it right. I tilted my head slightly. You don't need to make it right. Just stop pretending it was never wrong, he swallowed. I thought you needed our protection. You mistook silence for weakness. He looked down. She said you were just sitting on things you didn't know how to use. I gestured lightly toward the bookshelves behind me. Knowledge doesn't decay just because it's stored. He stood then. Mom? I didn't fill in the rest. I waited. I'm not asking to be forgiven. That's good. I'm not offering anything that hasn't been earned. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph. I recognized it, taken during his first year at the firm. He and I were standing outside the building, his first job offer letter in his hand. I was wearing that pale green cardigan that pills too easily. He stared at it. You were proud of me. I still am. He looked up, startled. But that pride doesn't belong to you anymore. You traded it for convenience. He folded the photo and slid it back into his pocket. I understand. We stood in silence. Then, almost uncertainly, he stepped closer. His arms hovered before gently wrapping around me, stiff at first, like he was afraid I'd vanish. I didn't return the embrace, but I didn't resist it either. When he stepped back, I saw something loosen in his shoulders. I'll go now, I nodded once. He hesitated at the door. I know it's not enough. It doesn't have to be enough, I said. It just has to be real. After he left, I sat for a long while in the chair by the window. The light was low. Not sunset, just dim. I picked up the envelope again. The divorce papers. The note. I didn't tear them. I didn't file them. I just folded them once more and slid them into the drawer beside the walnuts. Some things deserve to be ended. Others deserve to be remembered exactly as they are, without red ink, without revision, without ceremony. And some truths only begin when no one is pretending anymore. There's a kind of peace that doesn't ask for applause. I kept the curtain open this morning not for the view, but for the light. The sun filtered through as usual, tracing its familiar path along the tile to where the rug frayed slightly near the edge of the couch. I never had it fixed. Some wear feels earned. My tea steeped beside a closed notebook. Not the kind with lined pages or an embossed cover, just a plain spiral-bound one I picked up on a whim after walking past the art store on 3rd. It holds no plot, only fragments, sentences that never demanded to be read aloud. I don't write to be heard. I write to remember clearly, not the facts, but the weight of them. Every Monday I walk to the library. Room 2B has a folding table and 12 chairs, usually filled by kids who don't like math or say they don't, until I show them how to fold paper bridges and measure force with pennies. Last week, one of the boys brought me a tiny metal compass with a sticker of a race car on it. For finding your way, he whispered. I carry it in my coat pocket now. It doesn't work. The needle spins. Mornings follow the same rhythm. A 20-minute walk. Left on banner. Past the deli with the crooked door. Stop at the cart with the blue umbrella. Scone or oatmeal bar today. Miss Florence. They always ask as though I might choose differently. Black tea, I answer. No lemon. They remember. I still say it. Rituals matter even if they're redundant. I don't hide anymore. Not behind worn sweaters or budget grocery bags. I no longer leave decoy calendars out for anyone to see. No fake rent payments. No envelopes marked overdue. I folded that part of myself into a drawer I no longer open. Now the mail is mine. The home is mine. And I'm not pretending I can't afford flowers for the table. There are people who visit without needing anything. Rachel stops by after school some Thursdays. She brings leftover markers, sometimes homemade cookies, mostly just conversation. We don't talk about work. We talk about which books we never finished or how oranges used to taste sweeter. Matthew comes on the first Friday of each month. Not always at the same time, not always with notice. But he comes. The first dinner was at the Mediterranean place near 7th. He insisted on ordering for me, though he got my dish wrong. I ate it anyway. I noticed his hands had small calluses again. He'd started woodwork. Said it helped him think. The next time he invited me to his apartment. Small, neat, quiet. There were 2 chairs on the balcony, both unused. I sat in one. He grilled chicken, offered me a cloth napkin. It had a faint scent of cedar. The plates didn't match. He smiled when I pointed that out. I forgot you notice things like that, he murmured, handing me the salt. I didn't reply. I passed the pepper. We never mentioned Heather. Not once. Instead, he showed me a plant he was trying not to kill. A ficus slightly tilted. I gave no advice. Just observed its leaning. Last week, he brought an envelope. Inside was a photo of a backyard. hours from before, the lilac tree still blooming. A note, no signature. I remembered the scent before I remembered the fights. I folded it and placed it between pages 42 and 43 of the notebook. Not hidden, just held. Sometimes he says things that land like whispers you forget how to respond to. If I had known then what I know now. He doesn't finish the sentence. If you had, I wouldn't have needed to pretend, I usually think. But I don't speak it. We're done with confessions designed to wound. Once he handed me a handkerchief that belonged to his grandfather. I kept it all these years. Thought you might want it now. The embroidery was still intact. I ran my thumb across the thread. If I had known you were pretending to be poor just to test us. He paused. I might have failed faster. We both smiled faintly. I never needed him to grovel. I only needed him to see me as more than a resource, more than a vault with opinions, and now he does. We don't hug every time. We don't call every week. But when we sit fully. He looks me in the eye. I stir my tea slower. On my balcony, the white rose bush bloomed this morning. I hadn't expected it to. I thought the winter might have done it in. But there it was. A single blossom. Perfect. Quiet. Alive. Inside the shelf that used to hold old files now carries small ceramics from students' misshapen bowls, a lopsided cat, a cube that was supposed to be a dice. I keep them anyway. Imperfect things still hold. No more emergency folders. No more just-in-case letters. No names circled in red. No hidden accounts or encrypted messages. If anyone comes looking, they'll find only what's true. This afternoon, I'll make 2 cups of tea, one for myself, one for him. He might come or he might not. Either way, I'll set the table. I know now that living doesn't require vindication. It just asks for truth. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. Healing means remembering, without needing it to hurt.